My name is Jennifer. I'm a 34-year-old nurse from Tennessee, a wife, and a mother of two. I grew up Baptist, spent my life in church, read my Bible, and prayed every single day. I honestly believed I understood prayer. Then, one ordinary Tuesday at work, my heart suddenly stopped. For almost 9 minutes, I was clinically dead. And during those 9 minutes, I met Jesus, and he showed me 6 levels of prayer. He told me that 97 out of 100 Christians never reach level 3. Not because they don't love God, not because they aren't sincere, but because most people were never taught that prayer could go deeper. Jesus said, "Most of my people are only speaking to me from the door. I want them to come inside." Before you decide you already know what prayer is, stay with me. Because by the end of this testimony, you may realize that the prayer life you thought was deep was only the beginning. It happened on a Tuesday in March. Completely ordinary day. I was at work, on a 12-hour shift at the hospital. I remember walking down the hallway toward the nurse's station, and then I don't remember anything after that. What happened, they told me later, was that I had a massive cardiac event. My heart just stopped. Just like that. No warning. I was healthy, or I thought I was. 34 years old with no history of heart problems. But I had an undiagnosed condition, a structural issue with my heart that nobody had caught. And that day it caught up with me. My coworkers were right there, thankfully. They started CPR within seconds. The crash team came. They worked on me for a long time. I was gone for almost 9 minutes before they got my heart started again. 9 minutes. And in those 9 minutes, I was somewhere else entirely. I was standing somewhere. I don't know how else to describe it. And Jesus was there. I knew it was him the same way you know the voice of someone you love. You don't have to think about it. You just know. And the first thing he said to me was not what I expected. He looked at me and he said, "Jennifer, do you know that you have never really talked to me?" And I started to argue. I literally started to argue with Jesus. I said, "What do you mean? I pray every day. I've prayed my whole life." And he just looked at me with this expression that wasn't unkind at all but was very, very serious. And he said, "You've talked at me, but there is so much more. Let me show you." And that's when everything changed. He began to show me something. It was like he was unfolding a picture for me, layer by layer. And the picture was prayer. What prayer actually is. What it was always meant to be. He said, "Prayer is not one thing. It is a journey. It has 6 levels. And most of my people never leave the first room." Jesus looked at me and he said, "The first level is where almost every believer begins, and where almost every believer stays." He called it petition prayer. And as soon as he said it, I recognized it immediately because it was everything I had ever done in prayer my whole life. Petition prayer, he explained, is when you come to God primarily to ask for things. Healing, money, protection, a job, a relationship, a parking spot, whatever you need. You come, you ask, you leave. He said, "There is nothing wrong with asking. I tell my children to ask. It is written, 'Ask and it shall be given to you, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be opened.'" Petition is real. It is valid. It is mine. But then his tone shifted just slightly. Not harsh. Just honest. He said, "But Jennifer, think about this. If the only time your child ever came to you was when they needed something, how would that feel? Would you say that child truly knows you?" I didn't have an answer. He continued. He said the real problem with staying at petition prayer your whole life is not that you're asking for the wrong things. The problem is that it keeps you focused on yourself, on your circumstances, on your needs. He said petition prayer, when it becomes the only prayer you know, turns into something transactional. You come when you need something. When you don't get what you wanted, you either assume God doesn't care or you get frustrated and pull back. He said, "I am not a vending machine." And prayer was never meant to be a transaction. He told me that petition prayer is like learning to read using only picture books. It is a starting point, a foundation, but it was never supposed to be the whole house. Then he said something that hit me hard. He said, Most of my people know me only as a provider because petition is the only prayer they've ever used. They've never discovered who I really am because they never stayed in the room long enough to find out. I thought about every prayer I had ever prayed in my whole life, and I realized that almost all of them were some version of "God please give me this" or "God please fix that." That was it. That was my entire prayer life. 34 years. He said the first level is where you start, but he was about to show me that there was so much more beyond it. Then he said, the second level is where spiritual maturity begins to show itself. And already, most believers have never been here. Intercession. Praying for others. Now I had done this before. I'd say, "God, please help my friend," or "God, watch over my sister." I thought that counted. But Jesus explained to me that what most people call intercession is really just petition with someone else's name in it. Real intercession, he said, is different. It is when you completely set aside your own needs and you stand in the gap for someone else. You carry their burden as if it were your own. You bring them before the throne of God with the same intensity and urgency that you would bring your own greatest need. He referenced something from Ezekiel. He said, "I once searched for someone who would stand in the gap, who would pray for the land, who would intercede so that I would not have to bring judgment. And I found no one." He said that broke his heart. Not because he wanted to bring judgment, but because he was looking for a partner and there was none. He told me something about intercession that I had never heard taught in any church I'd ever attended. He said, when you genuinely intercede for another person who is struggling with the same thing you're struggling with, there is something that happens in the spiritual realm. Your selflessness creates an opening. When you abandon your own need to pray for someone else's need, I see that. And I move. He said it this way: you cannot truly intercede for someone's healing and stay sick yourself forever. You cannot truly intercede for someone's provision and remain in lack forever. Intercession breaks things open, not because of a formula, but because of what it reveals about your heart. He said this is why so many prayers go unanswered. Not because God isn't listening, but because people never move from praying for themselves to praying for others. The posture of intercession, the selflessness of it, actually changes the atmosphere of prayer. He also told me that intercession comes with a cost. When you truly carry someone else's burden in prayer, you feel it. You take on something of their pain. It's not casual. He said real intercessors feel the weight of what they're carrying and they carry it anyway. That's why most people never go here. It demands something of you. He said, most of my children stay at the first level because it's easy. The second level asks you to care about someone else more than you care about your own comfort in that moment. And that is hard for human beings. He looked at me and asked if I had ever truly interceded for anyone. Not just mentioned them in a prayer. Truly carried them. I honestly couldn't say that I had. Not like that. And then he paused before he told me the third level. Like he was preparing me for it. He said, this is where 97 out of 100 of my people have never been. And it is not because they are bad. It is because they were never taught. And because it is uncomfortable. The third level is spiritual warfare prayer. Now when he said that, my first instinct was to think about the kind of stuff that makes people uncomfortable. Loud prayer, dramatic prayer, people binding and loosing things in ways that sometimes seem strange. But Jesus reframed the whole thing for me immediately. He said, warfare prayer is not about praying against people. It is never against people. People are not your enemy. The enemy works through people, through systems, through circumstances. But the enemy itself is not human. And that enemy is real. He took me back to a verse I had heard 100 times but never really understood. Ephesians 6 verse 12. That we wrestle not against flesh and blood but against principalities and powers and the rulers of darkness and spiritual wickedness in high places. He said, Jennifer, most of my people pray as if the battle is on earth. But the battle is first in the spirit. And if you only address what you can see, you will never win what is being fought where you cannot see. He explained that there are demonic forces whose entire assignment is to block, to delay, to distort, and to prevent God's will from happening in people's lives. Not because God is powerless, but because God works through human prayer and human authority. He said this was by design. He gave authority to human beings and he does not take it back. He brought up something from the book of Daniel. Daniel prayed for 21 days. His prayer was heard on the first day, but the answer was delayed because of spiritual opposition in the heavenly realm. The angel told Daniel that the prince of Persia had withstood him for 21 days. There was a spiritual battle happening that Daniel couldn't see, but Daniel kept praying, and eventually the breakthrough came. Jesus said, "That delay was not because I wasn't listening. That delay was spiritual warfare." And Daniel's persistence in prayer was what sustained the battle until the answer broke through. He said most Christians pray once or twice, and when nothing happens they assume God said no. But sometimes what's actually happening is that there is spiritual opposition and the believer has the authority to engage it. They just don't know that. He quoted Luke 10 verse 19 to me. "Behold, I give you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you." He said warfare prayer is the prayer that engages that authority. It is binding what needs to be bound and loosing what needs to be loosed, as he taught in Matthew 18 verse 18. It is speaking directly to the spiritual forces that are hindering God's will and forbidding them from continuing. He told me that this level of prayer is intimidating to most people because it makes the spiritual war feel very real and very personal. And it does provoke a response from the enemy. When you start operating in warfare prayer, you become a bigger target because you become more effective. And most people aren't willing to accept that trade. He said, "But here is what you need to understand. The enemy is already at work in your life whether you engage him or not. The difference is whether you fight back." Most of my children are losing battles they have the authority to win because they never learned to fight. That landed on me in a way I'm still processing even now, being back here on this side. And then he said, the fourth level is where prayer becomes something entirely different. It stops being reactive and starts being creative. Prophetic prayer. He explained it to me this way. Most prayer, even good prayer, is a response to what's already happening. Something is broken, you pray. Something is needed, you pray. You are responding to circumstances. Prophetic prayer is different. Prophetic prayer is when you have received revelation from God about what He wants, what He has planned, what He intends to do, and you pray that into existence before it manifests in the natural. You are not reacting to what is. You're calling into being what God says will be. He referenced Romans 4 verse 17. That God calls things that do not exist as though they do. He said prophetic prayer is participating in that. It is speaking God's desired future into the present moment. It is praying with sight rather than just with need. He said in Jeremiah 1 verse 12 that God watches over His word to perform it. But He needs someone to speak that word. The word has to be spoken. And when a believer who is walking in intimacy with God receives revelation of what God wants and speaks it in prayer, things begin to shift in the spiritual realm before they ever show up in the natural realm. He said, most people pray about their problems. Prophetic prayer prays God's solutions. Most people are limited to what they can see. Prophetic prayer operates from what I have already declared. He was very clear that this level of prayer is not about making predictions or claiming things you just want. This is not a prosperity gospel formula. He said prophetic prayer requires intimacy. You cannot pray prophetically without first knowing God's heart. You cannot speak His word unless you have spent time hearing His word. You cannot carry His vision if you have never sat in His presence long enough to receive it. He said this is why this level is relatively rare. It requires the kind of relationship that most people haven't developed because most people have never moved past the first level. If you're still mainly asking God for things, you're not in a position yet to hear what God is saying. And if you can't hear what He's saying, you can't pray what He's speaking. He told me that prophetic prayer is what changes nations. It's what alters history. It's what shifts the course of things that look set in stone. When a believer prays from God's perspective rather than from human circumstances, they are partnering with God in a way that releases something enormous into the earth. He said, angels are dispatched. Demonic strategies are dismantled. Circumstances that looked impossible begin to shift. Not because of the person's power, but because they have aligned their voice with mine. I thought he was done. I thought 5 levels was the whole picture. But then he said there was more. He said, The fifth level is where many people get confused because it doesn't look like prayer at all. Contemplative prayer. The prayer of presence. He said this is the level where prayer stops being about talking and starts being about being. You're not asking for anything. You're not fighting anything. You're not speaking anything into existence. You are simply with God. He referenced Psalm 46 verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. He said the original Hebrew carries a meaning of releasing everything, of letting go completely, and in that stillness entering into an experience of who God actually is. Not what he does, not what he gives, but who he is. He said this is the prayer he modeled constantly in his own earthly life. He would pull away from everything and everyone, into quiet places, not to make requests, not even to intercede, just to be with the Father. That withdrawal, that silence, that communion, that was prayer too. That was perhaps the most important prayer of all. He told me that most of the Western Church has completely lost this. That the idea of sitting quietly in God's presence for an extended period of time with no agenda feels wasteful to people. Like you're not accomplishing anything. But he said the opposite is true. He said, in 1 hour of true stillness before me, more transformation happens in a person than in many hours of petition prayer. Because in that stillness, I am not just hearing you. I am changing you. You are absorbing me. You are being remade from the inside out just by being in my presence. He quoted 2 Corinthians 3 verse 18, that by beholding the glory of the Lord, we are changed from glory to glory. He said that beholding is not a metaphor. It is a practice. When you sit in his presence, when you turn your attention fully to him and hold it there, transformation is the automatic result. You don't have to try to become more like him. You become more like him just by staying close. He said the Hebrew word used often for prayer in the Old Testament carries a meaning of meditating, musing, communing. Not just talking, just being. And this was always intended to be part of what prayer is. He said, most people have never experienced me in this way because they never stay in the room long enough and quietly enough. They come in, they talk, they leave. But what I want is for them to stay, to just be with me, to let me love them without an agenda. And then he told me the last level, the sixth level. He said, this is where very few people have ever walked. Not because it is reserved for a special class of believers, but because it requires everything the other 5 levels have built in you. He called it union prayer, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is the place where the line between you and God's will become so thin, so close, that your prayers are no longer your prayers. They are his prayers prayed through you. You have become so aligned with his heart, so immersed in his presence, so practiced in hearing his voice and speaking his word, that when you open your mouth to pray, what comes out is him. He referenced Romans 8 verse 26. That the Spirit also helps our weaknesses, for we do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings that cannot be uttered. He said, Paul was describing union prayer. The Spirit praying through a human being. The human becomes the instrument, the yielded vessel, not disappearing, but surrendering completely. And out of that surrender comes prayer that is perfectly aligned with God's will, because it is God's will praying itself through a willing heart. He told me that this is what was happening in the great moments of prayer recorded throughout Scripture. Moses at the burning bush, Elijah on Mount Carmel, Daniel by the river, Paul in prison singing hymns at midnight. These men had gotten to a place where they were so aligned with God's purposes that their prayers carried an authority and an accuracy that went beyond human calculation. They were not just believers talking to God. They were vessels through which God was working in the earth. He said, this is available to all my children. It is not a secret club. It is the destination I designed prayer to lead every single one of them toward. But they have to be willing to travel the whole journey. He said most people stop at the first level because nobody told them there was anywhere else to go. They didn't fail. They just weren't shown the map. That, he said, looking directly at me, is why I am showing it to you. He then walked me back through all 6 levels together, and he explained something crucial that I don't want you to miss. He said these levels are not a ladder where you leave the lower rungs behind. They are more like layers. When you learn intercession, you don't stop petitioning. When you learn warfare, you don't stop interceding. When you learn prophetic prayer, you carry all of the previous levels with you. Each level is added to what you already have. He said the most effective believers in prayer are the ones who can move fluidly between all 6 levels. Who know when a situation calls for petition, when it calls for intercession, when it calls for spiritual warfare, when it requires prophetic declaration, when to just be still, and when to simply yield and let the Spirit pray through them. He said, think of it like a musician who can play every style of music. Not because they abandoned the basics, but because they never stopped building on them. A master musician plays everything from simple melodies to full symphonies because they committed to learning all of it. He said that's what prayer is. A full instrument. And most of his people have only ever played one note. Then he asked me something. He said, Jennifer, when you go back, will you tell them? And I said, go back? I don't want to go back. And he smiled. He actually smiled. And he said, I know. But your children need their mother. And my people need to know this. And then I was back. Gasping. Back in my body. Nurses everywhere. The crash team. Monitors beeping. Someone saying she's back, she's back. I remember the feeling of the oxygen mask on my face and the overhead lights of the hospital ceiling. After 9 days in the hospital, I went home changed. Not traumatized, but rewired. For the first time, I prayed to God not as someone asking for things, but as someone who had truly encountered Him. My prayer life is still imperfect. I still forget and slip back into asking. But now I know the journey. Jesus showed me that prayer has 6 levels: petition, intercession, spiritual warfare, prophetic prayer, contemplative prayer, and union prayer. He told me most Christians never reach the 3rd level. Not because they lack faith or sincerity, but because they never knew there was anything deeper. Fear also holds people back. Each level demands something more: greater faith, vulnerability, responsibility, and surrender. But those who refuse to remain comfortable experience deeper transformation and greater breakthroughs. Jesus said we were never meant to remain in the outer court. We were meant to go all the way in.